Welcome to Shepherding the Home, taking a look at family discipleship texts in the scriptures. Today, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 18, where God is speaking to Abraham, specifically relating to his role in the midst of God's plan for multi-generational faithfulness and for this filling the earth with disciples of Jesus. And so our text for today, picking up in Genesis chapter 18, when the men got up to leave, they looked down toward Sodom. And so the context of this is when the messengers have come with God's plan to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah. And there's that interchange back and forth between Abraham and the men, where Abraham pleads and he kind of whittles himself down to making a bargain with God. If 10 righteous people are in Sodom and Gomorrah, will he relent from destroying it? And here we see, as they're getting up, looking down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with him to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." So we're going to break this down a little bit. Again, it's in this context of God's destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, but we see something also going on here in relationship to God's plan through Abraham, and specifically what is Abraham's role within God's larger plan for his people. And so, again, this is over the course of several chapters here, God has promised that he is going to make Abraham a great nation, as many as the stars in the sky. Through his seed, all the nations of the world are going to be blessed. And so if you kind of break this down a little bit, you get the idea that God has a macro plan of salvation for all the nations. And this is going to specifically happen through Abraham's seed, through Jesus Christ, a descendant of Abraham, who is through his death and resurrection is going to redeem the world and draw all people unto himself. And so you got that kind of that macro plan of God that he is working through his covenant with Abraham. But then in the context of that macro plan, God also has a specific micro plan for Abraham, what Abraham will do. Abraham can't bring about Jesus. Abraham can't bring about the death and resurrection, all that type of stuff. That's God's work. And even in the micro plan, it's God's work through Abraham. But this is a marathon, and all Abraham can do is his leg of the race. And so God explicitly says right here in this text what the job of Abraham is. So Abraham's job is to carry this on, the salvation of Jesus, but he's going to do his part, which is, I have chosen him so that Abraham will direct his children and his household. See, God's micro plan is that each household will carry out the work of God, of discipling the next generation. And so God's going to bring about that micro plan of salvation for all people, that all nations of the world will be blessed. But Abraham now carries the baton for the first leg of the race. He is going to direct his children and his household to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. So what is God's micro plan for every generation? Is that the heads of the household, specifically the head of the household, the man, but the parents would impart faith to their children, that they would carry on that task that God has given, that they would direct their household in the ways of the Lord to act in ways that are just and right. And so this idea of family discipleship is something God established at the very beginning. We see even now that he brings his covenant relationship with Abraham. He is still commanding them into the ways of family discipleship, faithfulness to our calling, to walk in the ways of the Lord and to instruct those after us in those ways. I put down on there God's sovereignty and human accountability. I think that really kind of gets into this idea. God is doing his promises and he is carrying out his tasks, but he still tasks us as his children, or Abraham in this text, to do what he has placed for us to do, which is to direct our children and our household in the ways of the Lord, to keep and walk in obedience and to do those things that are right and just. And so even though God is going to carry out his promises no matter what, he still calls me to be accountable to doing the very tasks that he's asked me to do. And that is to direct my household and my children in keeping the ways of the Lord and doing what is right and just. And so I can't just say, well, God saves, I don't need to do my job. Or even me doing my job really is God's actions, and it's him working through me. And so he calls his children to have accountability and to walk in obedience to the ways of God and that which he has directed us. And so we see, the Lord, and this is, I think, a great kind of bringing it back around after it talks about Abraham's task, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. And so again, we kind of get right back to God's sovereignty. So God is going to do his thing. He's instructed Abraham what he's supposed to do. But God, in the end, is the one who still does it. He does it through us, for it's the work of the Holy Spirit. In Lutheran circles, we say, I cannot by my reason or strength believe in Jesus Christ or come to him. But the Holy Spirit has called me by the gospel, enlightened me in it with his gifts, sanctified and kept me in the true faith. This is God's work that he is doing through us, as by his word he shows us what our vocation is and what our job in his plan is, and he calls us to do it and to be faithful. And so God simply just sort of comes along, says, walk in faithfulness. This is the work of my word and the Holy Spirit in you. I will bring about the promises that I have given, and God's promises are always sure. And we see that Abraham and his descendants and us who live by faith, we walk in those promises that God has given us. So here we see God's promise in Abraham's faith. I kind of put a picture up there reminding us just in Jesus, we're going to see all nations of the world indeed are blessed because they have been brought to faith in Jesus Christ. So there's kind of that picture of Revelation. That doesn't mean that all nations being brought doesn't also include many a father and many a mother guiding their children unto the faith. And yes, we reach people outside of our homes as well, but we see this pattern of, like God said about Abraham, directing our children and those who come after us in the ways of the Lord. And through that, ultimately, that is how all nations are reached and gathered under the reign of God. It's by each leg of the race that Christ runs through each generation, passing on faith one to another. So with that, that's kind of Genesis chapter 18. I know it's in the midst of this kind of destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, but kind of a pretty impactful verse where we see God is still continuing out this idea of reaching his goals of filling the earth with those who love and worship him by doing it with each generation. That the head of the household and the parents are instructing their children and their household to follow the ways of the Lord and to act justly and right. And specifically, that is done by giving honor and allegiance to Jesus Christ, that seed through whom all the nations of the world will be blessed. And in doing this, God is the one indeed who brings about what he has promised. So hopefully that text is kind of a blessing to you as you think about the task God has placed in front of us to impart faith to our children, but to also trust and rely on our God who has given it. He is the one who is carrying out the work that he has given us to do. God bless you as you continue to grow in discipleship.